Now, there have been countless UFO sightings over the years, but many experts consider this next piece of footage the gold standard. Take a look for yourself. It's just after dark on August 25th, 2013, in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. The crew of a United States Customs and Border Patrol plane is taking off for a routine mission when they notice a strange pinkish light approaching from the northwest. They turn on their thermal imaging camera to track the object, and this is what they see. Let's take a closer look. It appears to be a metallic sphere moving fairly quickly around the airport. Then it heads out over the ocean where it does something truly unexpected. Did you catch what happened? Let's zoom in. The object seems to splash down in the water before re-emerging seconds later. Even more bizarre, the object then splits into two separate craft. And people, there is no known Earth technology that can do that. After nearly 4 minutes, the object disappears from view. Now, Puerto Rico is the location for several sightings of so-called USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Back in the 1990s, a Navy helicopter pilot allegedly saw an unidentified dark underwater mass during a training exercise. Another published report describes a similar incident in 1963 during an anti-submarine exercise led by the USS Wasp.
They keep talking about these incidents occurring around their aircraft carriers, naval ships. Puerto Rico, long history of interesting sightings, very long history.
What makes this video so special is that it comes straight from $1 million infrared camera mounted on a government plane. There's a ton of data to analyze here. So what do our experts think?
It's a credible case, it's a credible video.
Richard Hoffman heads the Scientific Coalition for Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. First question, is the video real?
The telemetry you see on the screen showing GPS location identically matched what you had with radar. So there really was an aircraft.
Next, Hoffman's team determines the object's temperature to help identify it. They compare the heat signature of the craft to some cows on the ground in this frame at the top of your screen.
We broke the video into 256 shades from white to black, all different shades of gray. And we were able to match that up with the temperature of the cows to match the temperature of the object. The object was roughly at about 104 degrees.
Right away, that eliminates a jet engine, which emits exhaust 15 times hotter.
The thermal signature doesn't match anything that we know now, and there's no sign of any kind of propulsion system on this.
Then they figure out the object's size using this frame when the object goes behind a light post 2 pixels wide.
Okay, well, the object went behind it was blanked out. So now maybe it's 2 pixels. That's why we come up with it's about 3 to 5 feet in diameter.
Based on that analysis, Hoffman says the most likely earthly explanations are eliminated.
We ruled out that it wasn't a balloon. It was about 18-mile-an-hour winds from the northeast, and this object was going in opposite directions from that. So it's clearly not a balloon.
What about a drone? Our aviation expert, Tim McMillan, is skeptical.
How are you achieving flight without an airfoil, without an angle attack, without wings, to simplify it? How are you doing that?
And finally, a bird?
We took a look at thermal signatures of birds and various other objects, and it doesn't match anything like this. And there you go. It's unidentified. It's not from any place here.
So is it proof or not? Well, you might think it's a bird, a balloon, or a man-made aircraft, but it is hard to explain how this goes in and out of the water and splits. So folks, we're gonna call this a UFO. You almost never see an object like this going into and out of the water. That's amazing. It's May 2011 on the Chandelier Islands, 50 miles offshore from southeastern Louisiana. Architect and amateur archaeologist George Jelle has received permission to do exploration dives in the area with a remote-operated vehicle. What his underwater videos reveal is astonishing. Scattered on the seafloor are what appear to be large granite blocks. The cubic stones don't seem to be at all natural, since they all have 90-degree squared edges and some have carvings and cuts. Check out what they look like after he's brought them up and cleaned them off. Could they once have been part of a larger structure? George says he's certain this is the site of an ancient lost city that he has named Chrysentis.
I'm an architect and a contractor, so I do know what buildings look like, even if they're underwater and covered up somewhat with sand. And that's what we have here. An ancient culture that nobody knew was there.
George says the location of this submerged civilization first came to him while sleeping one night in the 1960s.
I had an incredibly vivid dream. I got up and I sketched it, and the dream was what I call the Star of David diagram. And it showed in that diagram that if you start off at Giza, at the Great Pyramid, there were 6 cities at the same latitude as Giza, and one of them was in Louisiana.
Journalist Aaron McCarthy says George believes the block seen in this video could be at least 12,000 years old, predating the Incan, Mayan, and Aztec civilizations.
Granite is not natural to the area. His theory is that they were brought from somewhere that's not Louisiana and floated down the Mississippi at some point before the last ice age, when this area of Louisiana would have been above water.
And wait, there's more. George believes that just as we see in Giza, there is a 280-foot tall pyramid here that is now buried in silt.
He claims that it produces a ton of electromagnetic activity, and fishermen who fish out near that area say that it actually affects their compasses.
George says this buildup of energy gives more credence to his pyramid theory.
I know that having done 50 years of research in how they produce energy, the only architectural form that I'm aware of that can do that is a pyramidal structure.
At least one Russian study has found a pyramid's chambers can collect and concentrate electromagnetic energy. It seems clear these huge blocks were placed here by someone or something. As glacial ice melted at the end of the Ice Age, it flowed down the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico, submerging the coastline and moving it 60 miles inland. So could these blocks have been deposited here by the river? Or could a lost Louisiana city, which George calls Chrysentis, have been the Ice Age's greatest casualty? Archaeologist Dr. Ed Barnhart says if this site is really 12,000 years old, it would be from around the time of the emergence of the Clovis culture, thought by some to be the first inhabitants of the Americas.
Clovis was not a culture that gathered in large groups of people or in sedentary ways. They were hunter-gatherers. They traveled, and that's how they survived.
So if it's unlikely the nomadic Clovis would build a permanent site like Chrysentis, what about the humdrum explanation that this is just an artificial reef from more modern times, built as a habitat for marine life?
Typically, when we make reefs, we don't make them out of stone. We use things like tires and other lighter material that works just as well for creating natural reefs.
Physicist Matthew Shadagis weighs another theory. Could these granite blocks have been ballast dropped from European ships colonizing the area centuries ago?
At one point, ballast blocks were needed on ships to lower their center of mass in order to increase the stability of the ship. Then these rocks may get dumped.
The ballast stones were normally discarded in order to keep the weight the same as ships pulled into port to pick up new cargo.
However, calculations have been done that show you need at least 3 dozen ships or more to have dumped their ballast, all in this one location. It just doesn't make any sense.
So what about the theory that the electromagnetic energy detected here is evidence of a lost pyramid? NASA geologist Bob Anderson investigates.
If you take a rock that has a magnetic field in it and you take it out of place and drop it, it still has the magnetic field in it. That magnetic field is frozen in those crystals. So it would not surprise me that if somebody took a magnetometer down there and looked at these rocks, that they would have a very localized magnetic field from somewhere else where the magnetic field is strong.
Then could this actually be a lost city?
Sea level can change over time, and so I think it makes sense that you may have a city that's farther than where the coast currently ends.
Our verdict? These are possible city ruins. We know these rocks don't belong there, and we don't think it's an artificial reef. And as Professor Shadaga said, sea levels have risen in the Gulf dramatically over the millennia. But we also need to be cautious. More research needs to be done before we know for sure what we're looking at.
Japan's Ryukyu Islands extend almost to Taiwan, and they've long been an attraction to divers. Most come to see hammerhead sharks. But in 1986, Deborah Dixon Smith came for another reason. She was there to get a special tour of the official site known as Yonaguni.
You go in this dramatic entrance. It was like stepping back in time.
Once out through the other side, a whole city seems to appear.
It really just was one of those wow moments. And when you look over the edge, you can see down into this very, very deep gully. It was very dramatic.
Let's take another look at the details here. There are straight lines, steps, and sharp angles.
It seems to be that whatever this structure is, somebody built it there, and sea levels rose enough that it got submerged.
In this artist's rendering, it looks like a small city or a compound with a pyramid. And as Deborah learned, the site may be connected to an ancient legend.
There's a theory that the video is evidence of an ancient Japanese civilization known as Yamatai. It's said to have been a large, powerful nation that was wiped off the face of the world when sea waters rose and their cities were buried under ocean water.
Yamatai is said to have been ruled by a secretive sorceress named Himiko. Its location has never been determined, much less the reasons for its disappearance.
Here's the thing. Unlike Atlantis, the existence of Yamatai shows up in historic documents from around 300 AD. There's even a record of their queen, Himiko, sending an envoy to the Chinese emperor. The theory is that Yamatai sank due to the shifting tectonic plates in the region. But what's the real story? Let's see how our experts tell it.
Geologist Bob Anderson says it's not unreasonable to think this site was once on dry land.
If you go back 20,000 years ago, the shorelines moved around to different places, so you can't rule out that that was above water.
But did humans build it? The strongest evidence are those angles and steps. They seem too perfect to be formed by nature, at least to our eye. But it turns out that can happen naturally.
These are the sorts of things that geologic formations can break into because of earthquakes or tsunamis as they move. Those plates break in very, very geometric forms. There's no reason to believe that they had to be cut by man.
But if this is all natural, wouldn't we expect to see similar structures all over the planet?
This site is a geological phenomena. I don't know of another area where that large of stones have been moved in that kind of formation. But that does not make it a structure.
One big issue. Barnhart says these massive steps are actually larger than anything ever sculpted, carved, or constructed in the ancient world. And even though this is the most seismically active area of the entire planet, you'd still expect to find more evidence of a prior civilization if one had been here.
These large slabs, you'd expect at least in the cracks to find some sort of evidence of human occupation if it indeed was some sort of sunken place. There's nothing like that whatsoever. Archaeology calls those things geofacts. They look like artifacts, but in fact, they're naturally formed.
Based on Barnhart and Anderson's expertise, we're going to conclude that this site is a natural phenomenon. That means it's not the lost kingdom of Yamatai. Its location is still a mystery. So if you're diving off the coast of Japan, keep your eyes open.
April 2022, and the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument in Hawaii. The crew of the exploration vessel Nautilus is live streaming its adventures when it comes upon this startling sight.
interested
Wow,
in his
look at
picture.
that.
What?
At a depth of 3,375 feet, they spot what looks like a bunch of bricks off to the right of the vessel.
Yeah.
Oh, weird, yeah.
Okay.
Cobblestone.
Oh, yeah. Whoa.
They're astonished by their find and wonder if they have just found the road to the fabled lost city of Atlantis. Journalist Eric Grundhauser explores whether this might be the ruins of that legendary lost city.
This video is really incredible. This is what appears to be a paved road at the bottom of the ocean. You can see what appears to be symmetrical bricks that look almost man-made, except it's hundreds, thousands of feet underwater. Who would have built such a structure? The myth of Atlantis dates back as far as 360 BC when it was first mentioned in Plato's dialogues. And most people know of the myth that it disappeared beneath the waves and the ruins are still somewhere under the sea. According to the legends, Atlantis became so powerful and had waged war on so many of its neighboring cultures that Zeus himself decided to sink the nation, to make the Atlanteans pay for their hubris.
Grundhauser then wonders if this find could be remains of a landmass swallowed by the sea long ago.
Another popular theory about the origins of this supposed road are that it is the remnants of a culture that existed on what is sometimes called the 8th continent, known as Zealandia. Zealandia broke off of a much larger supercontinent known as Gondwanaland. Could this bit of road have belonged to a civilization that existed millions of years ago, long before Zealandia fell beneath the waters of the Pacific Ocean?
Legends of sunken civilizations appear in cultures all over the world, from Japan to Scandinavia. Atlantis, the island subcontinent, was supposedly submerged beneath the water somewhere past Gibraltar. Could that have been as far away as Hawaii? Let's turn to our experts to clear the waters.
Anthropologist Kathy Strain dives into the Zealandia theory.
Zealandia has been submerged for over 23 million years. Humans were not around that long ago, so the technology to build roads like this is only about a couple thousand years ago. So we know that this is not possible to be related to that continent.
Of course, another pre-human civilization could have existed on Zealandia and built roads, but we have nothing yet to corroborate that theory. Next, Strain weighs in on whether this road could be connected to the lost city of Atlantis.
Ancient cities that had these kind of thoroughfares always had lots of elaborate other artifacts along the pathway. You wanted to show off your wealth. And so you would have foundations of structures, you would have pillars, you would have statues, you'd have some archways. And those things would have been very heavy. The wave action, time would not erase that. You'd at least see some remnants of it.
So the absence of other artifacts appears to rule that out. Then what are we looking at here? NASA geologist Dr. Bob Anderson has a theory. This is simply a layer of sulfur on the ocean floor.
This is just one area of sulfur that formed like a road. The yellow is not really a gold color, it's a yellow color. It was formed coming out of a hydrothermal vent. We see it on Earth, we see it in deserts, we see it wherever the sulfur deposits are located, especially around volcanoes or hydrothermal vents. We see sulfur on some of these deposits on Mars.
But what about those strange brick patterns, so reminiscent of old cobblestone roadways?
That's pretty common in these areas where you have a very thin layer that breaks because of something on top of it. It'll break into these very nice patterns on the sides. You can see it on this side too. But then when you get into the center, you'll see it's more diffused and broken up. And that's usually because of that it's an uneven topography underneath of it that's causing this break.
Our verdict, this substance is just sulfur. Because there are no records of Atlantis before Plato wrote about it, most scholars believe the Greek philosopher is responsible for creating this myth. This might not be a yellow brick road, but it sure leads your mind to some fascinating places.
2007, near Traverse Bay, Michigan. Underwater archaeologist Dr. Mark Holley and his team of divers are scouring the lake bottom.
We were out looking for a specific shipwreck. It's just flat sand for as far as you can go. And it's just very eerie.
Instead of a wreck, they stumble across something much older. At first glance, it's just a line of stones. But Holley says there's more to it.
I knew that we'd found something that shouldn't be there, but we had no idea what it was.
One set of stones forms a circle. And strangest of all, look at this. One of the stones appears to have a detailed carving of a mastodon, here outlined with red chalk. Holly estimates the site was constructed around 10,000 years ago, before the glaciers melted to create the lake. Of course, Holly's video goes viral.
Almost immediately, people described it as a fake. Nothing like this had ever been found in the Great Lakes before.
Real or not, the discovery becomes known as the Lake Michigan Stonehenge and raises the question, was it made by the same people who built England's famed structure? Professor of anthropology Michael Masters raises a controversial theory that ancient Europeans migrated to the Americas long before Columbus.
This tool technology associated with groups largely in France indicates that they came across between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago.
Paleolithic Europeans in America? While some scholars are open to the idea, others point out that ancient Native Americans created their own astounding sites, like those of the mound builders in the Mississippi Valley. So who made it and how? And what does it mean?
One more thing to ponder. There's a region known for strange disappearances and anomalous sightings called the Lake Michigan Triangle. Early reports put the find there, but Holly now says it's north in Grand Traverse Bay. So what do our experts have to say about this fascinating find?
First, we ask archaeologist Peter Campbell if this could all be a hoax. He points to the moss and algae on the stones.
If they had been placed recently, then there would be no marine growth on them whatsoever. The formation as well appears to be a genuine archaeological site.
Campbell thinks the find is ancient and man-made. And if the mastodon carving is real, it might provide a window into a long-lost culture.
It's possible that this really had some sort of religious connotation and perhaps a religious offering or ritual related to the hunt.
But still, how did they carve that image into granite rock? Anthropologist Kathy Strain says it would have been difficult, but very doable.
So in order to make a petroglyph, it's a very simple process. It is taking a rock and pecking at the patina that's on the outside of the target rocks. Granite is a hard substance, but no special tools would have been needed. Rock art appears around the world using a similar method, and none of those people had anything other than a rock.
As far as comparisons to the English Stonehenge.
Stonehenge is a group of rocks put into a circle for a religious purpose, and were very heavy to move, and we are still not entirely certain how they accomplished it. The rocks at the bottom of Lake Michigan are more in a line.
Take another look at the arrangement of the Lake Michigan stones. Strain says it's very revealing.
This is likely what we call a drive line, and you use it to herd animals into either over a cliff or into some kind of fenced area. So it's a very efficient way of hunting.
It would be the oldest drive or hunting line ever found. When the glaciers melted more than 10,000 years ago, they submerged the site at the bottom of Lake Michigan, preserving it to this day. And Campbell thinks it could be groundbreaking in other ways.
If this is in fact a mastodon drawn on this rock, then it is a monumental discovery because this would be the earliest Paleo-Indian art that's been discovered so far.
Our verdict? Well, Mark Holly definitely discovered something man-made. We think by early Native American tribes, not early European immigrants. But whether it was built for hunting or some other purpose, we can't know until it's studied further.